Travis Wayne Goodsell. I'm up again. Oh man. Woke up at 6 to a coughing fit and the smell of the skunk that had moved further east. Apparently the skunks are struggling for food supplies, coming further in town. Oh man. This video is going to be a comment and reply to a person who's not a subscriber but is asking me for my story. He's talking about John DeLynn interviewing people who have left the church, whether through a disciplinary court or asking their names to be taken off the church rolls. He's always interested in my story. So let me reply to him, tell him it's number 12 with the LDS temple porn pics. I hope you guys understand by now that they're symbols. It's a symbolic thing that I'm doing, and because it's working to get people's attention, I'm gonna keep sticking with it. I mean, you get to see a woman in a beautiful dress, but pretty well, I don't know. I think by now people should catch on. Let's see, it's 12 because 11 was the one I did this morning. Right now to answer your question. Alright, let's get out of here. So, I'm technically still a Mormon. I have not had my names removed. I have not been excommunicated, not been disciplined, other than evil Jared Kushner, Lincoln Project. Other than having been dismissed by my bishop, threatening me to take down a video on my other old channel that said that the Book of Mormon was the official doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints regarding the fall of Adam. And the bishop was upset with that, wanted me to take it down, and then said, "Why do you even bother coming to church?" And there was the extortion threat. Nobody extorts me. At that point, I was going through a second divorce, being abandoned by a second wife, and so, yeah, great. You don't want me in the church? And you were told by members of the church who were also complaining about that video, who apparently were spying on me. Where are they now? They all abandoned me. Drinking orange juice to try to prevent myself from having a coughing fit. The pollution says it's level, yellow level. Now that I found the pollution website that does up to the hour levels of pollution. I was kind of enjoying the weekend because the coughing was going down, which means that the travel was going down in Utah because people either left Utah or left the area, left the valley, or they stayed home, knocking down the smog level, or pollution level rather. Shouldn't call it smog. The citric acid seems to work best on the phlegm buildup. My story, now that we're 6 minutes in. Born and raised Mormon, the firstborn, birthright blessing son of my parents, who both were Mormons, both served missions, and so my mom thought she had a more privileged position. She had gone to college at BYU, Idaho, and so there was a level of pride on her part for being among the rarer Utah women to get a higher education than a high school degree, and hold off on marrying right out of high school, and yeah, so yes, and white supremacist, which she claims was not as bad as her parents. Way to throw grandma and grandpa under the bus, who've been able to keep it a secret from me their whole life, my whole life. And so as the firstborn birthright blessing son, I got all the attention at the beginning. I was a larger than average child. People used to think that I was possibly 2 by the time I was 7 months, of which my mom said that I was running. My mom was 5'11", which is tall for women, and so how do I explain this without being pornographic? She was well endowed, and yet that was still not good enough for me. I needed rice formula supplement on top of it. I was just hungry, constantly hungry. And so the double portion alone was not good enough. I needed more than a double portion, if you understand the learning of the Jews. And so I was given lots of attention, but with my dad, I had to learn things on my own if I wanted to survive, as he tortured me as a little baby to hold my own bottle early, and to take care of myself, so that they weren't bothered with reading the newspaper in the morning or making breakfast and other things that my mom did, clothing, laundry, watching her soaps, watching Billy Graham. And so the evangelical Mormonism was already creeping in through solid Mormons like my mother, as she was allowing Billy Graham's doctrines to influence her over the course of decades, and as she implemented them on me. And so growing up, I recognized doctrinal contradictions as a child. I'm recognizing doctrinal contradictions. My parents were implementing certain systems on me, taking away my agency, but others at church, the few peers that were Mormon, listening to conferences, and reading the scriptures myself, I noticed everybody was speaking about the same scriptures, but everybody was speaking something different about their interpretation of them. And then the implementation of scripture was even more different. And I had taken notes throughout my childhood, and then eventually went on to assemble them together into what's called philosophy of Mormonism. And then I did a theology of Mormonism, which includes my Mormon illiteracy. I was a little hesitant to put that in there because of the violent backlash that I got from my stake president. Illiteracy was a big issue back in the 2000s, I thought, as the church had developed a third world literacy program, and so I wanted to help people with their study of the scriptures to eliminate the unsound falsehoods that are being applied to the scriptures. But I guess titling it Mormon illiteracy wasn't taken well. But yeah, all different types, categories of illiteracies that are being applied to scriptures by Mormons. As I was always top in my class in English and other foreign languages. I won't get one to the bluer than blue. But I still, even though I was recognizing contradictions, I still couldn't figure out the secret code of Mormonism yet. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had manuals and such, but they weren't putting it together. They still had contradictions in their manuals and their doctrinal teachings. No one was able to harmonize anything. Because if you talk about having faith, but then you have to have the consequences, and you have repentance, and then you have the atonement of Christ thrown into it all. They have to harmonize, because every Christian religion and other religions, they all have a system. Whether it makes sense or not, that's another issue, but everybody has a system. Mormons have the system, we're just not being told. And so some critics of the church have uncovered that it's the impossible gospel as they're putting the pieces together. But for me, it's not impossible, it's just contradictory. And so the church is not in sync with the Book of Mormon precepts, is what it is. Because there are too many Mormons who think that it's okay to do whatever, that they'll just repent if somebody steps in and says no. And they then will get a slap on the wrist, and they'll go back, and then they can be a spokesperson for evil as they go around telling Mormons and fireside chats, and now it's social media. Oh yeah, following the dark side is so wrong. I know that now, and I bear testimony that evil is wrong. There was a movement like that in the church, and that's not a testimony meeting. That's a confessional. You don't know the truth just because you know what's not true. And again, I was recognizing these things growing up in the church, and we kept getting told as teenagers, don't think you can do something wrong and that you can just repent and be able to then go on your mission or go to the temple. And kept drilling it in us. I was like, what have I done wrong? I never had a desire to do anything wrong, but that certain position with a woman seems interesting. I might want to try that. If I only had a woman that I was dating without shame that my parents might think that I'm sinning with her, and then it turns out that my parents thought I was gay because I didn't have a girlfriend, of which they were then considering me sinning with. It's a no-win situation in the church. You're sinner regardless of what you do with your life, or regardless of what you don't do with your life. And economically as well as morally and educationally, etc. The concept of getting in the honors programs so that you can get into a good BYU school was the goal. My brother wasted his whole high school just to go to BYU. He was, valedictorian of his class, and had taken all AP honors classes and aced them, only to go to BYU. And then he was wasn't sure what he was going to do at BYU, something like geology, and then he went on to the University of Michigan, because that's where we lived for a brief moment of time, and they slammed him. They said that his thesis was too Mormon biased, that he was not following the scientific principles for the field and the sound arguments necessary. He just was never taught those. He pursued memorization in his life rather than actual learning how to learn, as I did. And so the difference between my brother and I are a complete contrast. We're both failures in our own special way. His for following his mother's direction and became a loser in life. And yes, he's a loser in life. He became a social worker, convinced them that they were being religiously bigoted. He pulled the religion card on them, and then came back to teach at BYU. Couldn't handle that for too long. And then got a job working for the church in the records department. And I think that's what he's still doing. Who knows? But he wasted his life becoming an honors student, graduate, valedictorian to work at the records department for the church. That's a waste of a life. If that's what he wants to do with his life, great, but I know it's not. It's what he has to settle with. And so yes, he is a failure in life because he was not able to accomplish what he set out to accomplish as the smartest kid in class. Whereas I have failed in the sense that 2 failed marriages, both women abandoned me. The first one even abducted the children and fled the country to Canada upon hearing that I deciphered Paleo-Hebrew. How was Paleo-Hebrew going to give her a white big house with a white picket fence, her own separate car during the day, with credit cards, etc.? You get the picture. And so in that regard, my life is a failure according to the standards of society, of Mormon society even. That I couldn't keep a woman, that I couldn't have the good enough job to support a family, and that I'm not rising in the authoritative command of the church, and so therefore it's seen as a failure. For me, however, I've accomplished what I set out to accomplish. I became a decipherer of Paleo-Hebrew, became a decipherer of Egyptian petroglyphs, and discovered that the Bible stories are taken as translations from the Egyptian petroglyphs. And so chapter 1, for example, I've done this a million times, but we'll do it again here. Chapter 1 is the Egyptian creation story from Heliopolis. And I've done a book going all the way to Noah, showing the pictures for each story in the Bible to that point, from the beginning to that point. And so, yeah, I know exactly how Joseph did his translation, as Dr. Rittner was interviewed by John Dehlin, as I've talked about, and is where the viewer wanted to hear my story, as I most likely talked about it in that video. And so for me, I did exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to find out if Joseph Smith was an actual translator or if he was a fake. And I went in, as the Book of Mormon suggested, having faith. But it's not a self-fulfilling faith, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is unsound argument, as I've witnessed many Mormons pull. You know, they say that the Book of Abraham facsimiles are historically authentic. Well, yeah, nobody disputes that. Duh. The problem is, was Joseph accurate with his translations? Not about whether it's historically accurate. And Mormons don't understand. They can't grasp that concept. And maybe they don't think they want to, because they might find out that Joseph was wrong. That may be why. But for me, in my research, as I was pursuing Mormonism, with philosophy of Mormonism as a side project to deciphering, I let the science lead. Not my bias for the church to be true, because how was it going to be true? If I were to let my own personal opinions and beliefs and feelings lead me, then I'm creating my own Mormonism. And so I knew better than that. I knew I couldn't do it that way. And so I needed to find out real Mormonism, and thus find out whether or not Joseph was a translator. And At first, after I'd made my discovery and decipherments, I thought, oh, the Book of Mormon does seem to indicate some Egyptian knowledge, because I found the documents of which the Book of Mormon talks about. Zeum and Zenoch, the prophecies of the Christ, they're in the Egyptian documents. I found them. So the Book of Mormon is correct when they talk about that as the prophecies of those guys. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, right off the bat. 1 Nephi chapter 19. And the God of our fathers who were led out of Egypt, out of bondage, and also were preserved in the wilderness by him, yea, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, yieldeth himself according to the words of the angel as a man into the hands of wicked men, to be lifted up according to the words of Zenoch, and to be crucified according to the words of Neum, and to be buried in a sepulchre according to the words of Zenos, which he spake concerning the 3 days of darkness. Only Moses and the Book of Mormon, in these two places, talk about 3 days of darkness, solar eclipses, which required me to have an understanding of astronomy, which I also had pursued, which should be a sign given of his death. Which should be? Why not is? And so, yeah, I found everything in the Egyptian scripture to confirm that. And so I hadn't pursued finding out about whether the Book of Mormon was a real history of the American Indians from Egyptian records, because I was too busy with finding out if Joseph was a translator first. But yeah, stuff like this popped up to my attention. I went, oh, okay, yeah, I found them in the Egyptian records. So everything seemed fine. But the problem that I encountered with Mormonism is that they didn't like it that I was pointing out that Joseph is a translator. Upon moving to Utah after I graduated from the University of Lethbridge in Canada, where the first wife was from, I deciphered Paleo-Hebrew. The first wife says, my kids will not learn Hebrew, we're out of here. And away they went, with my parents' help, with the bishop's help, with the police's help. Everybody helped. Everybody was against me. I was the bad guy for deciphering Paleo-Hebrew. And I had just barely graduated, and yet I was expected to get my own house, not an apartment, my own house right away. My parents were completely clueless of how they had to take a cut in Utah, by moving to Utah, from the jobs that my dad used to have. Big difference. And the powers that be were purposely making it more difficult for the rising generations to own their own home. As at my stage, it was necessary for both me and my spouse to be educated and career-minded, to pool our dual incomes together in order to provide a basic living for a family now. And that concept just didn't click for my parents' generation. But I went to the church. You know, I have a job. I always had a job. That was not the problem. The problem was that it wasn't paying enough. And people did not understand that that's no longer the case anymore. I can't just say, hey, I've been to a university, I got a dual bachelor's, pay me what I'm worth. No, they don't do that anymore. My dad's generation, yes, they still were doing that. You get a bachelor's, you're supposed to have a starting salary because of your education. If you get a master's, it's a higher salary, and PhD, and even higher salaries, starting salaries. That's how it used to be run, but not for me. And so I knew that being the case, I went to the church. They were third on my list that day, but the first two did not hire me immediately, and so I knew that they didn't want me. They were looking for someone else, even though both had called me back one of them later that day, the other later that week, but they were too late. I had already gotten a job with the church, and I knew that I had to start at the bottom. That's how it works. The new economic system requires people to start in a field at the bottom, and you work your way up. And if you have education behind you, it helps you, but to work at the bottom, you pretty much have to get in high school and keep working the job as you continue your higher education. That's the way the system works. Now, yes, there are those who can cheat the system and have access to other successes like drug dealers, prostitution, other fine criminal activities. Teased one guy in high school because all of a sudden we knew he did drugs, but then all of a sudden one day he shows up in fancy clothes. Apparently he was becoming a mule. But didn't stop us from picking on him. And so, I was always working, but I had to recreate my research because the ex, well, she didn't divorce me because she knew the laws in Utah required that we were to sit down in council meetings, therapy classes, to try to convince us not to get divorced. It was bad enough with the bishop. And so she went off to Canada and stayed separated for a year before she finally tricked me into a divorce, because they have things done differently up in Canada, and I'm at a disadvantage being here in America. So yeah, I got screwed. And so I tried to live on my own because I didn't want to be with my parents. I thought that they were going to be nicer to me now that I had a family, but since they helped me helped her separate from me, I knew that they hadn't changed, and they were purposely sabotaging my life to conform to what they wanted me to become, which was a complete and utter failure like my brother. And so I went to the church after I redid my research of the alphabet, and was in contact with F. Michael Watson, Secretary to President Hinckley, and he said, "I'm fully authorized to speak on President Hinckley's behalf." President Hinckley apparently never even knew about it. as he had gone to his friends at BYU, and I knew exactly who he was talking about, because I'd already gone to them and humiliated them, and I knew the traditions already. I'd gone through biblical Hebrew. I'd studied the Bible. That was one of my bachelor's, of the dual bachelor's degree, was Bible studies, but not from the church. It was from a secular university, And so I was learning about the archaeological methodology and anthropology in connection with historical education about the Bible, rather than a biased religious view. So, documentary hypothesis, for example, we went over that a lot, as I took all of Thomas Robinson's courses, as well as his Greek language. And so he dismissed me because the BYU professor told him the traditional view that Joseph Smith is wrong. And I deciphered Paleo-Hebrew. I knew what I was talking about. So, fine. I did further developments on my research and had been submitting them to the church. They created a troublemaker file for me. So that would have been under the direction of F. Michael Watson, who created the troublemaker file. And so nothing was responded to after that. And I just thought, well, I'm sure they'll have it kept on file somewhere. Little did I know it was a troublemaker file. And that maybe someday somebody will rummage through it and find it and go, hey, this is interesting. I wonder what this is. Oh, wow, cool. I want to learn what this is. And so, yeah, no. It was used against me in a court of law. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Joseph Smith is a translator. Lock him up! That's exactly how it was. As the church tried to have me excommunicated back when I was in the older singles ward, I think, or what? No, it was the younger singles ward, because the bishop was the one who got up in the one sacrament meeting and told us, rambled off a whole bunch of lists of names of masturbation techniques. And I'm like, what are these? I think I recognize Pearl Necklace from ZZ Top. But I was like, what's going on here in Utah? Are Mormons that creative? But yeah, he threw out in that gang up meeting, I don't want to say gang bang, that he saw me not take the sacrament 1 week, which means I've committed sin. They were desperate to get me in trouble and to find fault against me. And I was just like, what the hell is wrong with you? And the stake president brushed him off and said, well, the prophet is the one who told us to do this. And I outright called him on it and said, the prophet doesn't even know. They were all, and so the stake president said, I'm going to go down there and talk to him myself, and I'm going to find out what's going on. So yeah, he never came back. They sacrificed him. No, he sent his, I think, first counselor to let me know about my status and that I can continue my research as long as I don't go contrary to the church. Yes, proving Joseph Smith as a translator is going contrary to the church. Yeah, the current church, who doesn't believe in translation, doesn't believe that Joseph Smith is a translator, and just got revelation for everything. So yes, I've been spending my life in the pursuit of Joseph Smith as a translator to be going against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Having a troublemaker file, attempting to be excommunicated, and being locked up without a trial, because they had no case against me. Oh, Your Honor, he's trying to show that Joseph Smith is a translator. Oh, get a rope. Okay. Yeah. So that's my experience with Utah. And so when I got out, when I wasn't supposed to get out, it was supposed to be forever. I was never to see the light of day ever again. Never have a trial, never see the light of day again for being a translator and showing Joseph Smith was a translator. That's how they treated me here in Utah. And I got out, obtained a computer, and immediately began redoing my research. Then moved here, got married again, and our reception, there was a husband of a person I knew from the older singles ward who said he worked for Amazon, and talking about how you can look at the ceiling and take pictures of it and publish it as a book on Amazon for free. And so I checked into Amazon and found CreateSpace, which they had back then before KDP, and flooded it with my books that I had still in my possession. My dad refused to supply me with my fonts, and so the current fonts that I had obtained were not compatible, and so all my work is encoded now. So I put a decoder at the beginning of it rather than spending the years that it took me to make, because it's not just enough to match up Egyptian pictures with the linear alphabet. You have to plug it into the vocabulary to test your theory. And so, yeah, volumes. Yep, you can see them, because I've got stuff boxed. These all right here, these volumes combined together are my vocabulary research. The blue book right there, that's my full alphabetical research that I've published, and then the bottom ones, that's the Egyptian Book of Abraham preliminary translation stuff. I did the video recently, previously to this, where I went over the fuller translation, not the full translation, the fuller translation, going over what Egyptologists don't know to know. They don't translate Egyptian petroglyphs. They only translate the text. And so their books are very small because they don't have much to work with other than the facsimiles and the papyri. So that's why. When the bishop here, Reed Hammond, it's now Bishop Cummins, but when Reed Hammond learned from the other Mormons who were tattling on me, Travis is saying the Book of Mormon is the official doctrine of the church. Oh, well, we can't have that. Travis, only the living prophet is the official doctrine for the church. Everything else is null and void. Oh, really? And so, yeah, I then pursued studying church history. I was already in the process of studying the signs in the heavens because of the announcement of the total solar eclipse just a few days before the election in 2016. And so I know Egyptian. I made the connection, in fact, in the Facsimile 2 video I just did that I talked about. And so, yeah, I knew exactly what it meant to have a total solar eclipse over the whole United States. And I was, my research stopped, so I haven't published the vocabulary work other than the previous research work. And so that's why I throw in occasionally a vocabulary thing for you. So like King David, that's why it's the star, the 6-pointed star. It's because the 2 delta, which is in Greek and Paleo-Greek, come from the Paleo-Hebrew characters. And that's why they joined them together into a sun symbol. Not the inverted pentagram, nor a star symbol. It's the sun symbol. The Sun King, King David Moses of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. And the Jews don't even know that. They're Hamido, not Semitic, as I keep trying to emphasize for people. And so I went to the stake president. He wanted to talk with me, and told him Bishop Hammond kicked me out. and he said, well, I don't see anything to excommunicate you for. Yeah. Huh. Okay, whatever. I'm going against the church, you know. I'm saying the Book of Mormon is the official doctrine. I'm saying Joseph is a translator. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider? And yeah, I've never been touched by a church court as a result. I just don't go to church because I know it's now the Church of Lucifer. Literally, the Church of Lucifer. That's what the Book of Mormon was warning us about. The great and abominable church that sides with the Gadianton robbers. That's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints after they assassinated Joseph Smith with a coup d'etat. Which is what I learned from when I did church history research and connected it to the Illuminati, and the Smiths were the Knights Templars and doing battle, and they lost. But a Mormon from among them rose up and knows the truth now, and Mormons want me dead. I have my stalkers now. It's permanent. Permanent stalkers. There's up to 3 of them, and they straddle in at different times. They're not able to keep up, I guess. But yeah, that's what I've been doing on this new channel specifically. The older one was more of exposing the church. This one now is warning everyone. This is it. We're about to see destruction. I don't know how soon, because I've been doing this for several years now. And I was hoping it would be sooner, so that I can just get this over with and go back to my research on Paleo-Hebrew vocabulary. Nope. It still keeps getting dragged out. So, I hope you guys are prepared. But that's my story. So I could have summed all this up in the beginnings, and I have proven that the Book of Mormon is the official doctrine of the church and that Joseph Smith is a translator. That's why the church hates me. Excuse me, it doesn't want me in it. Orange juice hiccup.